Hi, guys. Sifu Mark here. And before we start, I just want to ask you to hit that like button and also hit that subscribe button if you aren't already. For today's chat, we reach for a teacher of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission grappling. He has been practicing martial arts for 20 years and is the head instructor and owner of Spartan Martial Arts and Fitness located in Lauderhill, Florida. He holds a second-degree black belt under Professor Carlos Espino and is well-versed in training professional and amateur athletes. He has seen, felt, and promotes the positivity that the training of martial arts can cause for both adults and children alike. Please welcome Professor Devar Davis. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing quite all right, Professor. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, no problem, no problem. I'm very excited to have you. So let's go ahead and get into the interview. Don't mind me asking, sir, how did you get into the martial arts?
Well, martial arts is something that there was always a very strong childhood influence in martial arts. A lot of us experience that, whether you're from the United States or you come from the Caribbean. I actually migrated over here with my family in the early 90s. I was born in Jamaica, came here, and the influence actually started there. But when I came over here, we were big into watching Bruce Lee, and he had really, I think, the biggest influence on me at the time. But I used to just like to watch the videos and see what's going on. So long story short, I had an opportunity to start martial arts. My father got me into it. He saw the benefit of it, and when he got me into it, the rest was history. So I have a two-part experience with martial arts. The latter being the longer portion of it, which I'm currently in now, that started back in 2008. And the first stint with martial arts was from childhood up until about 1999. The style of martial arts was Niseido Jiu-Jitsu, which meant new generation way of Jiu-Jitsu. And ironically, I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. However, I started in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, prior to getting into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. From my experience, what the Brazilians did was focus more on the submission aspect of it and the ground control. Japanese Jiu-Jitsu incorporates a lot of judo techniques. And also we did formal, what they call in Japanese martial arts, katas, which is a series of moves that you go through different sequences and you had to memorize them, and they were a part of your curriculum for graduation. There was more structured base when it comes to the Japanese portion of jiu-jitsu, which has its benefits as well. Now there's the practical application, which I think the Brazilians did a great job of up until a certain point.
Okay. So before we get into that, let's stick a pin right there. So, getting back into your history there, Professor. So you started with, you said a Japanese style of jiu-jitsu, and
Yes.
then I've gotten into what came after.
So Japanese jiu-jitsu, and then at the same time I was studying a Japanese martial art called Seibukan Karate, along with the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, because my instructor at the time, Sensei Robert Pichardo, he was a black belt in both. And he had them, available at the school. So I took full advantage. I was a teenager at the time. And from my younger days, before teenager, I was just influenced by TV. When I got the actual chance to be in a dojo and learning these techniques, it was great. It even got to the point where my instructor gave me a key to the dojo when I was a teenager. So I would pretty much go there anytime. I would clean up, make sure everything was all right, and I would sit there and practice. Ironically, though, next door was a piano school. I was classically trained on piano. And when they happened to move there, it was a no-brainer. I begged my dad. I'm like, Dad, I know I'm doing the piano, but can I go here? He let me do both. So it was a great thing for me. After my piano practice, I would go right to the dojo, practice whatever I had to practice, and everything was fine. Everything changed when I went off to college, though. That's where the hiatus started.
So was there any kind of martial arts going, like for example, like any wrestling or anything else going on during
At that time? At
Yeah.
that time, no. I wrestled in high school. I went to
Okay.
South Plantation High School and I was on the wrestling team there. That's where my wrestling journey started. Other than that, it was just pretty much roughhousing. And in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, we did a little bit of ground control, but it was not as much as, like I said, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, the focal point is ground control.
Okay. So after learning at the dojo both the jiu-jitsu and the Seibukan karate, I think you said.
Yes.
How did you progress after leaving there to go to college? What got you back into the martial arts from college days?
Well, when I left, I graduated at 17 from high school, and I moved to Pennsylvania and went to Penn State University. I only did a couple years there. I didn't graduate from Penn State, but when I went there, I got to experience what high-level wrestling was. I only lost 2 matches in high school. When I got to Penn State, I don't care if it was the smallest guy on the team. The biggest guy on the team, you already know I'm not doing anything with. But the smallest guy, I thought I had a chance. Nah. It was an eye-opener. Because now you have people from across the world who probably got recruited on scholarship to go there. So now you're dealing with the best of the best. College level was totally different, but it was an eye-opener. I kept going back and showing up and, getting beat up, but it was, technique really changes things at that level. Now, it was a good experience for me to feel that, but part of it also was I kind of just phased out of it. It was college life, there's dorm parties, there's a lot to distract your focus. And I was not focused. I was 17, own apartment, own car, working, going to school. Eventually, the school started to become less, work started to become more, and to de-stress, there were the parties. And eventually I just had to reset, come back to Florida. And once I got back to Florida, I actually got into technical school, engineering. And I actually stayed with that program, graduated summa cum laude, never missed a question on any test, and was able to get into the field of aviation, which is totally separate from martial arts, but it was the avenue that led me back into martial arts, because once I got into the field of aviation, it was like, okay, I'm doing this now. I go to work, come home, but I'm kind of bored. And I was playing, remember the Nintendo Wii? I was playing the Nintendo Wii at the time, and they had the boxing game, and I was doing that, and I'm like, nah, man, I gotta get back into something. So I was actually looking for my old instructors from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. So I reached out and I talked to, I believe, my sensei, my old sensei, Robert Pichardo. His sensei was Sensei Rick Riccardi or Rick Picardi. I'm sorry I butchered that, but I actually called and reached out to him. But they're in closer to, I believe, Central Florida. So there's no way I could have got, because remember, the school used to be right next to where I used to live and where I used to do the piano recitals and everything. So I was like, you know what? Let me look online and see if there's any Japanese jiu-jitsu available. All I see is Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'm like, man, they even spell it wrong. Why they put the I in there? It's supposed to be Jiu-Jitsu, but but that was just my own ignorance. Then eventually I stumbled across a website and a place called South Florida Fight Club. And at South Florida Fight Club, I met my old instructor and his wife, and they really taught me Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and got me to stay. Like, it changed my whole perspective. Once I took a class and once I was able to train with the instructor, who was, he was tall, but I think I was bigger at the time. So I feel, you know what? I could take him. Wasn't so. Mopped the floor with me all over the place. But you know what? His wife, who was so small, I actually trained with her. She's the one who really convinced me to stay, because the control that she had on me at her small frame. The first submission I was ever caught in was an armbar, and it was with her. She's the one who caught me. Her name is Sofia Amarante. And she, she's multiple time world champion. And she really, when she caught me in that armbar, I'm thinking, okay, I could just flex out of it. I'll be fine. I didn't realize the power of leverage. It changes the whole field. When you're on that ground, I always tell people like this. If you are good at martial arts, striking, you're like a lion. But on the ground, that's like you stepping into the water with the alligators. If you don't understand that terrain, it doesn't matter how good you are. You have to understand and study both. So that's what got me sticking with it. Primarily, I love the striking. I used to compete in striking tournaments, but I had a different respect for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu after that experience, and I just stuck with it since.
So you've been with the same teacher the whole time?
For Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Yes.
No, Felipe Amarante is the husband of Sofia. He got me to, I believe, my brown belt. And I got my black belt under Professor Carlos Espino, who used to train at the school with us too. And then Professor Carlos and I ended up actually going into a joint venture with purchasing the school. And then we changed it to Spartan Martial Arts. And eventually he phased out of the business aspect of it, but he still trains with us. He still mentors me when it comes to the arts. He has probably about an extra 10 years on me. I got my black belt pretty fast, and I don't say that to brag, because it's not bragging. I kind of wish I was held back a little bit, because I felt sometimes it was moving too fast and there was a lot of pressure. Now I feel I've grown into the belt, but I feel that there was one point where I was actively competing. By the time I felt, okay, I can win this tournament at this level, I get another belt. And I'm like, but I didn't, let me go under this belt first to see. But I was always being pushed. Typically, it's 10 years to get your black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on average. But when you look at my mat time, the mat time was different. 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and sometimes double classes with a full-time job, raising a family. So the mat time was probably equivalent to a 10-year period. At least that's what my old instructor told me when he was promoting me. Because I asked, why am I being promoted so fast? I didn't understand it. But he also looked at how I was teaching the people coming up behind me. I was teaching classes from I was a blue belt. Not because I wanted to, and blue belt is just above white belt. Not because I wanted to, but because it was a necessity. Sometimes your instructor cannot do everything, but you are a representation of the teachings of your instructor. And you can alleviate some of the stress from your instructor by helping out with the students that are beginning. That shows growth, and that shows progress, and that shows that you understand the system that's there. I realized that a little bit early, because our journeys sometimes in martial arts, no matter what art you take, sometimes it can be a selfish one, because At one point, I just wanted to beat everyone, especially when I was actively competing. It was just about winning, even in practice. But in practice, these are my training partners. If someone gets hurt in training, that's one less training partner that I have. And Professor Carlos really helped shift my mentality when it came to that, because training with him, it got to the point where I saw that he would let me try. And I used to get mad at him. I'm like, why are you letting me try? No, beat me. That way I can, focus and try to beat you. What he was trying to point out was that you're making the same mistakes over and over. And you're not seeing it because you have an emotional attachment to the fight. You're not thinking logically.
Mind blown. Definitely. You're emotionally invested, as you say. So you're not seeing the whole thing in a objective manner.
Nope. And I deal with that every day now with new students who come in. There's a humbling phase that comes in, and I teach different disciplines. So right now I have a few MMA fighters that I'm training, professional and amateur. And it's to the point where sometimes you see people, whether they come from different schools or they come fresh, but maybe they have done sports or they've lifted weights or something. We have this false idea that because we're athletic, we can hold our own in hand-to-hand combat. Sometimes that's not the case. There's levels to this. Because you're physically gifted doesn't necessarily mean you understand how to navigate those waters, so to speak. There's some people who, if you look at them, they just look like nerds. You would never think. And I'm not just talking about in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because there's plenty in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's plenty in Muay Thai. Shout out to my old instructor, Cosmo Alexander. When he puts on the glasses and he has a regular shirt on, you look like, man, I could take that guy. But then look up his name and you see all of the fights. He's been to Thailand. He's been all over the world. And then you see him in person and you're like, oh, okay. And then you see him practice and it's a whole different ball game. Now it's funny because I'm training fighters who sometimes he has a school out in Naples. Sometimes our fighters are put to compete against each other, but we still have a great rapport. I'm looking to go out there to go to his school, and we're planning for him to come to mine as well.
With your expertise in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I feel very confident in asking you this. What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, sir?
Well, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is an adaptation of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. The Gracie family are very famous for, they basically get the credit for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's some murky waters there when you deal with two of the brothers who are the pioneers of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's Carlos Gracie and then there's Helio Gracie. Helio being the youngest of the brothers. Sometimes you go to different Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools and you'll see their pictures on the wall. The older brother wasn't necessarily known for his jiu-jitsu matches. However, as far as promotion, getting the name out there, he did such extensive work to really put the family name on the map. Helio Gracie, the younger one, was known for his actual competitions, his fights. Then he had sons, and you had Royce Gracie, who was famous for UFC 1, where he came in there with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gi, smallest guy. Yeah, he's about 6'1", but skinny as a rail. Goes in there against these big wrestlers and end up submitting them. The family was known for that, but they were trained originally by a Japanese migrant who came over to Brazil and settled there, but then they kind of made it their own. So they took, and the word judo, the etymology of the word means gentle, and jiu-jitsu is known as the gentle art. And in modern times, you hear people talk about jujitsu. It's just simply folding clothes with people still in them. But, but what I like about it is it's a lot of times every class we do live rolling. So the equivalent to sparring when you're standing up, we call rolling in jiu-jitsu. The structure of the class is we teach a ground technique. You train that technique, you drill it, and then after that, you have a live rolling session. And then we switch partners in the live rolling session. This is where it's critical because the background that I have, we used to always try to hurt each other. That is not a sustainable model. What I try to do at my school now is if you are a higher belt and you're training with another higher belt and you want to test yourself, if you've been there long enough, have at it. However, if you're a higher belt going against the lower belt, kind of guide them through. But it's very dangerous going against the lower belt though, because they don't know certain things. Give you an example. I'm training with a gentleman who is probably twice my size. He has me on the ground. I'm putting him in a submission. It's called a triangle choke, where you use your legs, you make a figure four, wrap around their neck, and it starts to choke them. He tried to pick me up off the ground, being aware I cannot let him elevate me. I underhooked his leg so he can't pick me up anymore, and then I rolled him over so I was in the top position. There's been times where I have seen people get someone in that same choke. The person is just beginning. They're probably strong, they're athletic, but no one has told them you're not supposed to do that. And someone ends up getting hurt. So what I try to do is lay out the rules first. Whoever rolls with me, you do whatever you feel necessary with me. However, if there's a new student that comes on, they're paying for guidance. They're not paying for a concussion. They're paying for you to help them develop their game, because you never know what they could develop into. Once I stopped competing and I started to focus on the students, the mentality shifted. It wasn't necessarily about me anymore. And I was very reluctant to do it because I still wanted to compete. My goal was professional MMA. That's the trajectory I was on. But we had to make quick decisions back when the opportunity presented itself to buy the school. Now, when we bought the school, there were things that we just didn't know that we had to take time out to kind of figure out. But yeah, so there we are. But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the art of submissions on the ground. If I was just to break it down to you, you learn how to submit someone on the ground and you learn ground control. It's great if you are a police officer or anyone in law enforcement, a bouncer. You learn how to control the person without necessarily having to use strikes.
Okay. So it's not necessarily just on the ground.
It's primarily on the ground, but you can submit the person standing, or you can actually use a wall as well to try to submit them or even just control them. And Japanese Jiu-Jitsu had a lot of elements of that. Small joint manipulations where wrist locks and a lot of elbow locks we learned in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. They have them in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well, but the ground control where you're able to either keep a person on the ground until someone comes to assist, or you can apply enough damage to either break a limb or put them to sleep so you can get to safety. We recommend it for women all the time because a lot of aggressors like to close the distance. It's great when you're a striker, but if you're overpowered and pushed into a corner, what do? It's a very uncomfortable situation when someone is pressed on you. even if you're trained and you don't get the leverage that you need, how do you use your legs? How do you use your hips? That's where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu come in. But it's an element of fighting that's important, but it's not something that should just be the focal point. It should be a tool in the toolbox.
Okay. All those aspects of that you're describing, like the joint manipulation and stuff. All of these seem like aspects for self-defense rather than say for sport. It's a beautiful segue into a question, which nowadays Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu seems to be subject to, which was the same with karate, Japanese martial arts, which is also the same with Chinese martial arts, whereas element of sport and self-defense. Whenever sport aspect gets promoted more or equally to the self-defense aspect, it seems like the self-defense aspect just shies away. And I'm noticing that's what's been happening with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu of late. Right, a lot of people have been thinking of the sport aspect versus the self-defense. For example, one notable guy who is very vocal about the self-defense of it in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I hope I don't mispronounce his name. He's one of the Gracie guys.
Hickson Gracie?
Yes, there you go. He's been very vocal on the self-defense. So what is your stance on the sport versus self-defense aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, sir?
In my opinion, they both have their value. You have to be able to adapt. It's not required for my students to get involved into the sport aspect, but if they want to, we study the rule set, we see what we need to do, and we prepare for it. If someone's more focused on the self-defense aspect, we go over that as well. You have to be able to adapt. There's a certain rule set for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners who are in the beginning stages of their career, as far as if they want to compete. You cannot do certain small joint manipulations, one of them being heel hooks. As a white belt, you can't perform a heel hook. Even if you know it, you'll get disqualified. One of the things about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there's always exceptions to the rule, but once you reach a certain level, you should have over time developed a certain level of control. Small joint manipulation with the wrong pressure applied can end someone's career. So you really have to understand and make sure that you're being mindful of what you're doing to a person. So if someone is training with me and I'm rolling with them, I'm not gonna roll like how I did when I was competing. It was different. These were people who trained arguably just as hard as me, and we were competing to see who would win. Now, I'm not talking, there's some dirty fighters out there. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about someone who trains hard, focuses on the sport, and we want to go in there and test ourselves. A lot of the time, I would say 85-90% of the time, it's very respectful. There are some instances where there are legitimate rivals. But for the most part, it's a sport and we treat it as such. The self-defense, usually the people who are more into the self-defense, they don't really compete. They train with the competitors, but they don't really compete. They don't really see the not that they don't see the point in competing, it's just not something that moves them. However, learning how to defend yourself, and if you're put in a situation where you have to protect yourself or your family, being able to do so it's very good knowledge to have. Now, in sport, certain things don't transfer over into real life. One of the biggest things I talk about with my fighters in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is pulling guard. So when I first started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, my old instructor would always tell me if I'm fighting a wrestler to pull guard. I wrestled. If this person is a wrestler and I have wrestling experience, I don't care if they're better than me. I want to see where I stack up. However, if you pull, are you familiar with what pulling guard is?
That's going on the back, right? Going on the back.
Yes. So if you can make contact with your opponent, you can pull guard. So the rule, people adapted to it. They'll just touch your shoulder, grab your lapel or your gi, and sit down. That's not practical. In a real fight situation, you would never think to do that. In the sport, it's acceptable. So I think the practitioner, instead of getting mad about the different aspects of it, learn them both. Why is it that we have to be so rigid in the approach when it comes to whether it's sport or whether it's not? It's competitive. It keeps you in shape. It keeps you healthy. It helps you with your longevity. If you have high blood pressure, it helps keep the pressure down. It's a good release. There's so many other benefits to it. I train active competitors now, but if someone tells me they don't want to compete, I don't lose sleep over it. But that's my take on it. It doesn't bother me either way. If someone wants to compete, I'm there for them. If someone just wants to learn how to defend themselves, that's a different story too. And part of defending yourself is knowing when to make the right decision. Sometimes it's not about using the skills that you've acquired. Sometimes to keep yourself alive, you may have to give the aggressor what they want, whether it's your wallet or whatever the case is, just so you can make it out of the situation. That's what I mean about practical application. You have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to make a decision critically on the fly. And if you see an opportunity, then understand the consequences that may come with that.
Okay, because that would have been my next question. Are the self-defense techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practical?
Yes and no. So one thing that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does great is focus on ground control and submissions. I think everyone should practice that. However, when you're one thing that they don't focus on is strikes. Look at a lot of MMA competitions. Only few Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, like I'm talking solely Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's a few of them who really make it through the ranks with just a primary skill set. You cannot go into mixed martial arts with one primary skill set. I don't care what your base skill set is. You need to study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You need to study wrestling. You need to study traditional boxing. You need to study Muay Thai. And you need to do strength and conditioning. Your base can be what it is. It can be Wing Chun. It can be whatever it is. If you're getting into mixed martial arts, you have to study those elements. Do not cut yourself short. We've evolved from the time of where it's style versus style. Everyone knows everything now. And these young kids coming up are adapting. There never used to be MMA schools. There was a school with this specific art, a school with this specific art. Now there's schools that are adapting to MMA. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you have positions called deep half, where your legs are controlling one of your aggressor's legs and your arms are controlling the other. The problem with that is their hands are free. 2 punches to the nose, you go from black belt to brown belt to purple to blue and back to white. And next thing you know, you're waking up. What happened? So yes, there are elements of it that we use, but when I'm training my MMA fighters, I really want them to focus on MMA. We do a lot of ground strikes. So in those same positions that I'm talking about, where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has the advantage as far as control, when you introduce strikes in the mix, it makes it more practical. Now, is MMA practical? Yes and no, because you do have strikes, but they're closed fist strikes. When you're dealing with self-defense, what if someone has long nails and they claw your eye? Fish hooking with the nose. You know what I mean? There's so many things that are prohibited in MMA. Groin strikes. That is a self-defense move, but it's prohibited in MMA. So there's so many things. Now, not that I'm bashing MMA, because I'm not. I practice every day. I think it's beautiful, and I think everyone should do the same. And I'm not defending anyone who has anything against it. It's just the people that I see most who have something against either MMA or or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they don't necessarily practice it on a daily basis. And I'm not one to just defend blindly. So I can talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because I have years of experience doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I can criticize it. I can tell you where its flaws are, but I have to also address my flaws as a practitioner too, because we're all flawed. Everyone is different. You have to understand your body type. You have to understand your limitations and your progressions. So my work is to make sure that people develop themselves as much as possible based on their skill set. Take bits and pieces of the people that you're surrounded with and use that to develop your game. Some people are more flexible. Some people are faster. Some people are stronger. I try to teach them how to control when you're dealing with those different elements. But as far as practicality, yes, there are some elements of it, but there are some elements that won't do you any good in a real life situation.
And that's a very honest answer, and I am thankful for that honest answer right there, sir. So let's move on to our next one.
Yes.
And in your honest opinion, Professor, what is the hardest part of developing Jiu-Jitsu?
As far as a skill set?
Yes.
Okay. So from what I see, a new practitioner comes in. Sometimes we have these preconceived notions of what level we're at when it comes to combat sports. When speaking specifically on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, someone may come in and they don't necessarily understand the rolling aspect of it. And they probably have never been put on the ground before. And then when they do it, it feels like you're sinking in quicksand. The heart starts pounding because you cannot get this person off of you. What I try to do is, and people do not want to get submitted. In order to learn, you have to get submitted. I cannot tell you how many times I've been submitted. But it got to the point where I started getting submitted less and less, to where now it's maybe occasionally a student will catch me slipping. One of the higher level students, which is great. That means I'm doing a good job. I'm okay with that. You know, if I read this saying, it said, if a black belt taps you out, that's what was supposed to happen. If you tap out a black belt, that means you were taught well. So a lot of developing your game is getting out of your own way. You can't expect to walk into an environment that you're unfamiliar with and end up in like the top 5%. You're gonna start at the bottom. But I try to encourage people to stay the course. That's why in the beginning, I've learned to roll with new students at their level. Also protect myself too, but roll with students at their level and incrementally step up the intensity with them as they're starting to see. I approach that with teaching boxing fundamentals. I approach that with teaching MMA and teaching kickboxing as well. Footwork, everything. The basics are your foundation. People now are trying to skip the foundational movements. Part of the reason why you have all these submissions in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is because of the ground control in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, learning how to keep the opponent down there. But if you skip the ground control, whether it's side control, mount, knee on belly, those are things that you have to understand, and you have to understand how to chain them together. If you skip that aspect of it and you just focus on the submissions, I saw this submission on YouTube, I'm going to try it today, and you go to class, you can end up hurting yourself or hurting your training partner. So I tell people all the time to slow it down. Even when I'm sparring, when we're doing MMA sparring, which is, it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's kickboxing, it's everything. I tell them, we can go, but you're going to get frustrated because you're going to try to do something to me. And you can be bigger, you could be faster, you could be stronger. I'm not going to play that game. I need to protect myself. An example, I was training with a student who signed up with us. He's 300 pounds and he came from a boxing gym. So primarily he was doing boxing, but I saw that, his footwork needed work. So long story short, we did a sparring session in boxing. After a couple of hits, I hit him to the body, I caught him with a hook, and I caught him with a straight right. Different sequences. Just, nothing hard, just, enough to let him know that these spots are open. He crowded me in the corner. So I can't go anywhere now. I just had to protect, and he's throwing these punches out. They're hitting the elbow. I'm blocking, they're hitting here, and I see it. As soon as I saw my opening, shovel hook to the liver, straight right, and the fight was over. Had I have gotten into a shootout with him, I can't match his power. I have to respect it. So when it's time to shell up, it's time to shell up, but I'm still aware, I'm paying attention to everything going on. Luckily, we have boxing glove on and not MMA gloves, because the MMA gloves are smaller. But I was able to absorb those, and it's not his fault. He's a product of how he was taught. When we had our second session, I told him, let's slow down 50% and still go at it. I'm going to open myself up to getting hit. However, the harder you hit me, I have to match your energy. We had a great session, and the only thing that happened was he got tired because of the cardio. But he said, can we do it again? Because I'm starting to see something. And he's starting to see where he's making his mistakes. See, if you learn how to drive on 95, chances are you're going to get into a crash. You need to start in a parking lot. You got to know the vehicle. You got to understand, where your rear view mirror is, where everything is that you need. But people want to start on 95. They want to start right there when they spar. You can't do that. You have to slow it down. So there's a humbling phase that comes in the beginning. But for the majority of people, once they're humbled, one or two things is going to happen. They're either going to become some of the best students you have, or they're going to leave. And I'm okay with that. As I tell people, I'm not for everybody, because my focus is on development and discipline, especially with the children. Emphasize discipline. I hope I answered your question. Sometimes I kind of a little bit, but
Oh, you definitely did, Professor. You definitely did. Just to let you know, what is the hardest part of developing jiu-jitsu? And you said to me to slow it down and stay the course.
Yes.
I completely agree with you. And to be completely honest, I think that's a philosophy in life for everything.
It applies
Slow
everywhere.
down.
It applies everywhere.
And stay the course. That's a great answer there. So let's move on to our next question. how has your martial training helped or influenced your professional career, sir?
Oh, wow. It has taught me patience, understanding, twofold. The competitive aspect taught me that at any given moment, if someone sees an opportunity to capitalize on a mistake that you made, it can cost you the whole fight, even if you've been winning the whole time. So make sure you're paying attention. Awareness is key. At any given moment, respect that opponent. Do not think that you have won the fight because you are winning the fight. It is not over until that last bell sounds. And I tell my fighters this too. But for me, it's you really have to focus on the developmental aspects, and they apply to everything that you're doing in life. Everything. So for me, what I've learned is patience for myself. Temporary defeat does not mean permanent failure. We all go through temporary defeat, and it builds character. A setback is only a setup for a comeback. So just stay the course and these things will develop on its own. And that's what I try to teach my guys. Patience. Patience is everything. Don't try to move too fast. Slow down, absorb it. Your time will come. And that's to any practitioner of any martial arts out there. A lot of times we watch people on the sidelines as opposed to watching what's right in front of us. Our destination is there. But a lot of times we're watching the competition and comparing ourselves. It's an unhealthy thing to do. But that's what I would say on that. Stay the course and focus on your goals. You don't look at someone's highlight reel and compare it to your beginnings. It's unfair to you.
This is true. This is true. And really, really think about it. It's true. It is very unfair to you. All right, just slow it down, go at your own pace, but just keep going. Don't stop.
Don't stop.
Yeah, that's applicable for everything in life. It's true. It's very true. So, since we're being a little bit philosophical and all, Professor, let's move into a different question. Let's switch gears.
Sure.
If you could teach the new generation of martial artists, in which you do, only one thing, it could be technique or philosophy, what would it be?
I would say be willing to adapt to change. At one point, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu had cornered a market when it came to fighting. The Gracies would go to different schools, different disciplines, and challenge them, and they were submitting everybody. The world has adapted now. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, instead of just one standalone element, it became a necessary tool in the toolbox, as I said before. I think everyone should practice, everyone should know it, but don't just focus on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu aspect of it. There's so much more, and this applies to life, this applies to everything as well. If I can only teach one thing, is keep your eyes and mind open to change and be adaptable, especially when it comes to combat sports. Because if you're adaptable in combat sports, you can apply that to every aspect of your life. One of the hardest things to do is start over. When I started judo, I was already a black belt. Some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I never understood this. Some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructors, they would wear their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt taking a judo class. I wouldn't. I take mine off, I put on a white belt, because that's what I am. I need to learn those principles because When you're a black belt, it doesn't just make you a black belt at everything. My discipline that I've studied the longest and I've gotten to a black belt is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Everything else, even Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm still developing. It's still a process. Even as a black belt, I'm still learning things every day. Be adaptable. I'm in my 40s now and I'm still learning. Even though I'm teaching, I'm still learning. The moment you stop learning, you stop growing. And when you stop growing, just like any plant, just like anything out there, you start dying. So that's what I would say. Be adaptable to the situations and aware of your surroundings. And that'll take you far. Take that mentality into practice as well. Adapt to the practice that you have there. Adapt to school. Adapt to everything. Pay attention to the little details that are there, because in those details are the answers that you're looking for.
So be adaptable.
Adaptable, yes.
I understand that. I like it and I agree with you 100%. Being adaptable. Yes. So, last one. How can you be contacted, Professor?
If anyone wants to reach me, you can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Spartan Martial Arts and Fitness. Our telephone number is 954-616-8837. You can visit us at 4753 North University Drive, Lauderhill, Florida. And you can call the number, you can text, you can visit us on the website, www.spartanma.fit. Those are the avenues. You can talk to me about anything pertaining there, or you may speak with one of our representatives, and depending on what you're trying to do, depending on what you're trying to learn, we'll make sure we take care of you.
Okay, information for Professor Devar Davis and Spartan Martial Arts will be in the description down below. Also in the description down below will be a link for Feiyue shoes. If you need a link for Feiyue shoes, click the link down below, get the best prices, get the best deals, all at Feiyue shoes. Professor Devar Davis, thank you very much for being with me today, sir, and educating me on what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.